Briefly, we'll go through intros of who each of us are. We've got some questions here. We're also happy to take questions from the group. The benefit of these panels is for all of you to be able to ask folks who've been through this, who've had this experience for advice. Now, we can't see very well, so you may have to yell and holler, but I think we can find a way to go. But other than that, we have enough content to fill the time, so if you're not feeling question ready after lunch, that's okay. Quick intro, my name is Aidan Parisian. I'm a partner at Connor Group. My focus is around data analytics, AI, and automation. We do a lot of work with Clarity, for example. Prior to this, I was a head of product, head of sales, and head of customer success at a software company, and then I spent a decade in audit and finance prior to that.
Yeah, I'm Daniel Ruiz. I'm from Jones Lang LaSalle, which, if you're not familiar, is a commercial real estate firm. I'm the business process lead there for finance. And prior to that, I spent a lot of time at Deloitte in their strategy and operations group, doing a lot of business model transformation type work. Then I went to a bank, HSBC, sat in their COO team and did quite similar stuff there. And again, now I'm at JLL. So when I see a tool like Architect, seeing what it can do, bringing all those insights to us, I get really excited about it.
Cool. Hello, everyone. My name is Ahmed Zaidi. I'm the CEO. I take the title Chief Automation Officer. I like that better because I'm a nerd. At Accelerate, we're an AI and automation company. We've been working with Andrew and Nishil and their team for a while, both on the Automate as well as the Architect product. We help folks like this implement products and automation and transformation programs that they're doing within their organizations. We're an automation-focused company, so we're the service provider that helps you implement things that they're designing and transforming.
I'm Scott Farrington. I'm the Chief Accounting Officer at Stripe. I lead a lot of the kind of finance operations, transformation, operational excellence things across all of finance. Before Stripe, I was at Amazon for about 9 years, and before that, I was at Deloitte about 9 years. I've been at Stripe just over 6, so I have 3 more years to transform all of finance.
Hi, everyone. My name is Angelina Hendraka. I'm the Chief Accounting Officer at Redis. It is a data infrastructure. I can't say database because my CEO is going to yell at me. It's a data infrastructure. We are late stage, and right now we are a very happy customer of Clarity. How we got into Clarity is we're at about 1,100 people right now, and no process documentations. So we're super excited to be using Clarity Architect to finally get started on making sure that these processes get documented.
So the focus of this panel is around preparing yourself for transformation. At Connor Group, we do a lot of consulting. A lot of the questions we get are, where do we start? What do we do first? One of the perils of automation is bad processes automated, just repeat over and over. For those of you who've seen Office Space, right? He puts the disk in the computer and rounds off the pennies, and pretty soon he's got, I forget how much. It feels like a lot of money. Back then it was probably only about 10 grand, thanks to inflation. So this panel, the purpose of this session is to be able to talk through what are the stages. And so the stages we have outlined are kind of the preparation. So how do you understand your current state? Secondarily is around optimizing, right? So you figure out where you are, you figure out where you want to be, creating a blueprint for that change, and then implementation. And then we have a couple sections at the back end around kind of normal governance. So Dan, we'll start with you. What's the first step in documenting finance workflows? And how do you ensure you're capturing the right details to build a blueprint for AI-driven transformation?
Yeah, we start with a taxonomy. I mean, before we can start transforming things, we have to make sure that people are speaking the same language. A lot of what I would call good end-to-end transformation starts by looking across groups. So looking at, let's take like procure to pay. Obviously, there's a natural overlay with procurement and finance. You've got tech elements of that too. If we don't have a clear set of boundaries around what our taxonomy is, if we're speaking different languages, we're not going to be able to see eye to eye on how to transform. So really putting those guardrails up, to me, is the first step. And applying that to Architect even, we're taking that, if you want to use Architect to get like what I would call micro transformations, to understand one process and how to fix that one process, I think you can use it as plug and play right out of the box. And we started doing that. But then we realized, actually, we want to do what I would call macro transformation. We want to look across all of our processes. That's really the power of Architect, looking across all those processes and figuring out, where am I doing things in a manual way where I'm doing it automated somewhere else? Where am I using low-cost locations? Somewhere else I'm using a high-cost location to do the same thing. That's very, very difficult to do, but if you put the right structure in place, if you can record consistent level of depth, consistent processes that speak end-to-end, that connect to each other and don't overlap, you really unlock a lot of that power. So that's how we've started that journey, is figuring out our taxonomy and thinking about how can we build that whole blueprint overall for JLL.
Anything to add from the group?
So we get brought in just like you guys do to look at a lot of the organizations. I think it's important, as Daniel mentioned, to look at the organization holistically. We do this whole department function, task, role, and then have a good understanding of what that looks like and how that can roll up, back, and down, so that you can actually put some value to where's the work being done? Is it high cost, low cost, and what the return will be by automating this, and why you're doing certain things. I think you guys will attest to this, and you say, hey, listen, cost is not always the thing. Hey, I want to close sooner. If that's the return, you may not be looking at places where there's a lot of people, and look at opportunities where there's more manual work in closing. So defining the objective, I think, is really important as well as you start automating. That's what we see.
Yeah, the one approach that that has worked quite well for us is identifying owners. So the taxonomy is definitely a good place to start, which we did. But I think we took it a step further and actually assign owners to each one of these sub-processes. And the reason why we're doing that is so that even though these individuals may not necessarily oversee and manage the team that's performing the work, there's one person that is accountable for the processes globally. Because I'm all for standardization, and I feel like having a single owner helps drive towards the standardization. And so what I was telling the process owner is that, hey, look, it does not need to be standardized across the board, but if there are variations, I really need to know why, so that the variations are intentional as opposed to accidental. So, I feel like the comment that I think Caroline made in the previous panel really resonated with me, how she went through and then talked about how AP is done 3 different ways in 3 different places. That's really what I'm trying to avoid.
Everybody said something, so I should probably say something.
Don't want to be left out.
You'll hear this from me again, because this is kind of my go-to point, but I'll say it now as well, is that I think there is a right way to do this, getting it all known up front, getting the taxonomy. And I really do think that's probably the most effective if you know you have that commitment for a period of time, that sponsorship over time, and all the people that are going to kind of stay in those roles. My history is that never happens. So you need to balance the doing it the right way and doing it the deliver results, get some points on the scoreboard way as well. I think that balance is super important.
Yeah, it's a good point. I was at another conference about a week ago, and we had a operating partner from Insight, and we were talking about a similar topic. And one element she mentioned is when taking on these longer projects, to give yourself stop signs, right? Give yourself bailout points, especially when you're taking on a project that's amorphous and isn't deterministic and doesn't have a clear line of where we're going. It gives you moments to kind of stop and check in, because I think, again, if you get the buy-in from an organizational level where you can put this across the organization, somebody at CEO or COO level is pushing that down, great. But to your point, I think oftentimes these are done a little bit more hand-to-hand combat.
And oftentimes, maybe when you're in the thick of it, you're with your OE team or your transformation team, it's not that amorphous to you, but you have to put yourself in the shoes of the whatever it is, the 50 people, the 1,000 people you're trying to bring along for the ride, the CFO, the CEO you're trying to get sponsorship from. It's more amorphous to them, just given their distance from what you're doing.
Yeah, that's a good point. So Angelina, before implementing AI, what steps should finance leaders take to assess their current workflows and identify areas for transformation in their blueprint?
Yeah, so I think it's much of what Daniel mentioned. The taxonomy is definitely the starting point. And now we have that consistent across at least finance function within Redis. And then, having owners be assigned to maybe at that high level or even one level down. And then really looking at how we're doing things. What's also important is, I think, understanding your tech stack, because through this exercise, I just realized that my accounting team is basically like a zombie. It has, a lot of different SaaS tools that are doing very specific things. So it forces us to have these conversations as well in terms of whether these are redundant or whether, if we can just consolidate some of these vendors because maybe some of these vendors have the same tool or have the same functionality, just to kind of simplify the process a little bit. And finally, what the next step that we did was looking at the data. What data structure do you have? Because, we're a data company, right? So, we look at the data structure. We also looked at, whether we have the right level of metadata in there. If not, what do our processes need to look like such that we capture the right level?
Yep, that makes sense. Anybody else have overlapping functionality in their applications? So how do you balance standardization against flexibility, right? Obviously, the optimal state would be everyone does one thing and they do it well, but businesses are moving fast and growing at all times. Any thoughts on where you draw that line or how you strike a balance?
That's a good one, near and dear to my heart. We've been doing automation for quite a while now. So every time we go in, and you alluded to it, right? A bad process automated multiplies the outcomes there. We saw that, there's two schools of thought. One will say, hey, optimize the whole thing first, make sure you got everything out and it's a perfect process, then start looking at automation. And the other one says, hey, automate it as is, and then, we'll figure out that stuff later. What we found is actually like akin to your stop signs. In order to automate a process, you first start with analysis of the process. I have found so many times we go back to them with a process definition, flow chart, and you go to the C-suite or the managers and say, this is what your process looks like globally. Here's and they go, oh my God, I did not realize there were so many swim lanes and so many boxes and so many diamonds in this flow chart. I thought it was very simple. And right there, if you have the checkpoint to say, you can very quickly see that thing and say, this is a bad process. We need to optimize this before we go forward. So I think starting with, yes, we're going to automate this, but let's analyze it, get the current state, and then make the decision of whether you want to optimize it and do it in line with automation, because I think how you optimize a process for manual execution versus automated execution might be different. You have technologies, you have, you do 4-eye checks because somebody typed something wrong. You don't have to do that with automation. Never takes a spreadsheet and types it wrong into the system. So you might do things slightly differently. So we find that doing an optimization step right in line with your automation initiative works out really well.
Something you said there at the very beginning really resonated with me. I always say, as Chief Accounting Officer, you'd think you'd say controllership, no risk. I am all for taking risk and having manual processes and serving our users, as long as it's intentional. And like what you're saying, Ahmed, is, are you okay with standardization or flexibility? Well, if you're flexible because it's very intentional and it's for this reason, I understand it, then I'm all for it, and we'll bend our backs, we'll break our backs, we'll work all night to support this thing because we all agree this is something we need to do. Oftentimes, like you say, it's like, oh, wow, I didn't realize we had 7. Why do you have 7 ways to do PayP? Like, I think that should just be standardized. There's some things that you should just say, they're standard, and if we have an exception, it's quite intentional. You know why you do it, and you support it, and it's the right thing to do, and then you get behind it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I would say, if I break down the different reasons why you have variations, it's because no one's looked before. Yeah. Those are the kind of things you want to address. You have to understand why they're different and then address them. But sometimes it is very intentional. You might have different reasons, like different jurisdictions. You have different statutory requirements where you have to report things a different way. Or you've used the system for a long time, and the cost of change is just too high. But at least you know why it's that way. Maybe you don't choose to change it, but it has to be intentional.
Yeah.
Yeah, we find that a lot of organizations, I think that last point you made is you're moving too fast. It's like running downhill and your body's getting over your feet. And you're like, I would love to stop and tie my shoe, but if I stop, it's going to not go well. And I think a lot of folks will continue, and what that does is that will snowball over time, right? Aggregates the problem set. So standardization versus policy change versus data structure. If you had to pick one, what do you think the one is most important?
Stumped everyone. It's like your favorite child.
Yeah, it's
We all,
what's your-
we
your
all
favorite
have
child.
one, but we don't want to say it out loud.
or your least favorite child, depending on how you think about it.
Okay.
I find it very hard to change data structure. I think that is probably the most important, but it's the thing I have the least amount of control on in the near term and interim state. And I think you can kind of mitigate the risk that comes with that with standardization. So it's kind of like that versus long term or short term. It's hard. I feel like sometimes at Stripe, we're a high growth company, we have data all over the place, and people can say, we really need to structure this data. It's like, yeah, I wish I could fly too, but we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that this quarter. You can iterate on that incremental improvements. But I think standardization is something you have a lot of control on because you can actually just use the tools we talked about today to understand the process and drive consistency and standardization.
Yeah, and I'll put my old consulting hat back on and I'll say it depends, right? So it depends on the situation. So there's not always like one answer for every problem. It depends on what the actual business need is. And then the answer to standardization, data structure, et cetera, might vary based on that, the circumstances.
Do you use a quadrant to decide?
True, that's a true consulting answer. Yeah, it's we find in our data work that we do, we have two sayings. One is data is everyone's problem, which means that data is nobody's problem, which means that data is finance's problem. And the other one is that most data problems are people problems, right? So most data problems are because data is not being entered the right way, process is not being done the right way. And so this is a trick question because it's a combination of policies which are driving the standardization, which will lead to data fixes, which will, right, and there's a circle there. I could do another consulting slide for you. So what are the most common optimization techniques that you've used in finance processes before layering in AI? And Dan, we'll start with you on that.
Yeah, I mean, we use quite a few techniques. First, it goes back to really understanding the problem statement. What are we actually trying to solve here? And there's different ways to do it. So we'll use automation, of course, is a common thing that we use. Process excellence, just understanding what actually is the root cause. Sometimes tech is the answer. Sometimes process is the answer. Sometimes it's an org design situation. Who's owning something? Who's not owning something? So really, it all comes back to getting the facts right first. But those are the techniques we usually use. Is like, I think someone mentioned on one of the earlier panels, like people, process, tech, or a variation of that. We look at all of those angles as we're looking at standardizing.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I'd let these two answer because we're the ones that implement most of the stuff that you guys do.
No, I think for us, it's also dependencies between sub-processes.
Yep.
Really understanding the dependencies actually help open people's eyes. And they'll say something along the lines of, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that because I did it that way, it actually impacts downstream for these other guys that I haven't really talked to. So as part of onboarding clarity, we had a lot of those discussions.
So actually, this was a question I was going to curveball you guys with. So Angelina, you walked me right into it. Getting buy-in for these projects, right? We kind of zoomed into, we're going to go do process documentation. But as everybody here knows, step one is to make sure that people want to participate, that the organization is focused on this as a problem. You don't have to answer because I'm curveballing you, but any thoughts? And maybe I think you were already speaking to it, is how do you get buy-in from other departments that are, this might be your project in finance, but you're asking ops, you're asking manufacturing or somebody else to participate?
I mean, I think a lot of it is to do with the actual problems itself. So I'm not going to go in because nobody has time. I'm not going to go in and fix something that is not a problem. So I always start with what are the problems that are visible to others. An example that I have is around marketplace purchases, right? Because we sell in marketplaces and whatnot. And then there were questions about, hey, for our customers that do sell through marketplaces, why do we need to get a separate signature, right? So then the question becomes a process question, but it all started from the go-to-market team because they were the sellers are the ones that have to basically live with these two parallel processes when they want to sign up a new customer or close a new deal. So I think for those ones, we knew that it was a problem. We knew that it was cross-functional. we are able to get a lot of buy-in and a lot of engagement from these other teams, much more than if we're talking about payroll when everyone is getting paid. Like nobody cares. Like as long as everyone gets paid, then people are not as sympathetic to the internal problems that that happens within payroll. So I think when I am trying to stack rank which ones I want to do first, it will always go with, okay, these are the processes that are cross-functional, the problems are visible, and the problems are actually helping us, are preventing us from moving the business forward.
And I think Joe said this on one of the earlier panels, is that a lot of other functions end up leaning on finance. So finance thinks about finance last. And I think there's truth to that for sure, but then we also can lean on that goodwill, right? So by building those relationships with other functions, we've delivered their projects, we've delivered things that will benefit them, and that builds the goodwill, but also builds respect for like how we approach problems, how we're gonna solve it. So to Angelina's point, I'm not gonna solve a problem that doesn't need to be solved. And I sort of build that respect and goodwill through helping deliver other projects. So then when it's time for a finance project, I think some of that happens organically because I know who to talk to and I have those relationships.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Any thoughts? You too? No pressure.
I guess at the risk of being totally repetitive, I think say the same thing Daniel was saying. I really do believe in leading by example, especially when some of the stuff can sound pretty bureaucratic, transformation, operational excellence. And I think it's helpful to take an area, improve it, transform it, show real benefits. Then somebody says, why aren't you doing that over here? Like we started in P2P, and then it went really well. So expanded to our finance operations team, and that went really well. So expanded my whole org of controllership. And then the CFO is asking, why aren't we doing this across finance? So we started doing it across finance. And then the people team comes to talk to us, and we're collaborating with the people team. And I guarantee if I would have started and said, this is what we're going to do, let's start where we are now, there's no way. There's no way it would have, maybe they would have said, go try, but it wouldn't have had the same organizational support it has when you can kind of, I think you're saying the same thing, like leading by example and earning some trust along the way.
I think they call that boiling the frog.
Yeah.
So when we get into crafting a blueprint, Scott, I'll go back to you on this. What are the first steps in creating a roadmap or blueprint for AI-driven finance transformation?
I do think Daniel talked about earlier having taxonomy. I think there's a lot of value to understanding the state of your world and somehow inventorying or cataloging, what does everybody do? But again, I really would emphasize the balance of you can't take 6 months to do that. Now, Clarity's talked about some products today that could maybe take that 6 months and shrink it quite a bit, but I still don't think you would start with understanding every single process in your organization. You need to get some higher level understanding of the process to identify your highest ROI opportunities and go after them. And it doesn't have to be, I always say, don't over-engineer it. Sometimes you can use feel in the beginning. This one seems like a real problem. I can kind of put a fence around it. It seems tractable. Let's go. Now, if you just started that just based on your understanding without doing that cataloging, you may not start at the best spot. So I again, it's that balance of understanding the state of the world and then going after something that you can really drive improvement. And then from there, you can say, did that work? Is my catalog good enough? If it is, I'll go after the next one. If it isn't, maybe I take some time to go deeper on the next step.
I think to what Scott said, right? I think I'll flip the question a little bit. You said AI initiative. I think it's more automation initiative and optimization initiative, right? I think we now talk about AI a lot just because it's all generative AI and ChatGPT and LLM, that type of thing. We look at it a little differently and say, hey, listen, I now have this new capability here. And again, you guys are in fairly established organizations. It's not like you just started thinking about automation yesterday and going to do it now today. So you'll all have some sort of automation, some sort of optimization initiatives that have been going on, and we see a lot of that. What we're seeing specifically with the AI capabilities that you have now, I think we're seeing a lot of education on the top level to say, this is what we couldn't automate before. We couldn't match vendor names. We couldn't match a product to a GL code. We couldn't match a category to a particular thing. We couldn't read documents really well. We couldn't generate these two tables that a PO and invoice don't match, and we couldn't give you why. Now you can. You have some of that capability. So now looking back at the things that you have already automated and say, hey, how can I optimize them even further? Where can I introduce sort of AI, understanding of the capabilities? Again, I'm not talking about the traditional machine learning AI models that all of us are used to. That stuff has been there and it works, right? But there are new capabilities, so understanding that and then looking back at your initiatives and say, I have automation in these 4 places. People generally tend to ignore those. Say, yeah, I got that automated. But then there's people in between that are doing a lot of stuff and understanding what I can optimize further. That works really well.
And then Scott, back to you. How about short-term wins versus long-term goals as you do these optimization projects?
Yeah, I mean, my secret sauce is get people in the team that actually know what they're doing and know how to do this right. And even maybe index on doing it in a traditional like we're talking about, that actually go through, get that catalog, go through the process documentation, accelerated with AI tools now, and then I sit there and tell them to go faster. So I like short-term wins. I've worked in companies that nobody's super excited about transforming finance. So you have to show results, and you have to show where you're putting those hours to do more value-added work. So have a long-term plan, but just really push yourself to have a bias for action on delivering near term. And just like that relentless, incremental, iterative delivery, I think is better than saying, at the end of the year, I'll deliver you X. You really need to show that iterative improvement, or that incremental progression.
Work tactically towards a strategic goal.
Yeah, have that strategic goal, but then
work
be
tactically.
relentless about yeah.
I come from capital markets IT, right? As a consulting and service provider, I used to go to my customers and say, give me $5 million in 18 months, I'll build you whatever you want, right? But then shifting to automation, specifically process automation, I saw that, and I think the world has also gone to instant gratification world. Especially folks in your seats don't have those 2 years to show something meaningful. We went completely the opposite and say, what can we deliver in 3 months that has return, right? First automation out in 8 weeks. Let's show that this thing works. Let's show that we can get return, and then use that return to actually invest in more automation. Again, figure out small teams, very specific things that have a return. It doesn't always have to be monetary. It doesn't know, whatever objective you're trying to do at a reduction, productivity, cost, whichever one it is, pick one and deliver that very quickly. That gets you the budget that you need to do the rest of the stuff.
Daniel, turning moderator, you have a more established business.
Yeah,
is it the same?
I use a phrase of, yes, it is definitely the same. I use a phrase in my team, done is better than perfect. Like, you need to build some of that momentum, as you talked about. Like, if you went with that big grandiose picture of like, we're gonna do all this, people might say no, or they might just not buy in as much. When you prove it, you build organizational momentum to actually deliver bigger change. So I think really getting some of those wins on the board, iterating, failing fast. I think it was Gordon maybe that was talking about initial and how you ask for like a product change and 2 days later it's there. Like, that's that in action. Like, learning what works, what doesn't, failing fast, and delivering. If you try to build perfect, you're gonna take forever, and it might not be what you want it to be.
Yeah, no, I would agree, because I think my favorite saying, and what my team likes to say, like my favorite saying is that, well, can we just try it out and see what happens? So, not in that callous way, but I think, the spirit is that if you keep on designing, testing, redesigning, retesting, you're never going to get anywhere, especially for things as fast-moving and evolving as AI. So what I told my team is that, hey, let's just POC this thing, let's try it out. If it works, great. If not, then let's just move on.
It's a good point. And as a small coin in the bucket for Ahmed and I, consulting, as you said, Scott, find people who know how to do it. They say the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is knowing tomatoes are fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. The reason you hire consultants is not because we know what you don't know. It's because we know how to not do it, right? We've made the mistakes 100 times, and we can tell you, I wouldn't do it that way. There's always multiple ways to get there, multiple paths. But having somebody on board who's done it before, who can provide some guidance. Plus, the best part about vendors in a consulting relationship is when things go sideways, you blame it on them.
Never.
So any questions from the group? I think we've got about 10 minutes left. We've got a question upstairs. where are we at?
Thank you.
I mean, I'll take a first pass at this one. So sometimes people don't know problems that exist until they're presented to them. So just because it's not on the business's radar doesn't mean it's not important to the business. It comes back to some of the discussion earlier. Once you know the facts, it can change your perspective. So whether you're in the business, whether you're in finance, whether you're a customer or a vendor, once you know the facts, you can maybe get behind a change that you wouldn't have known you needed before. So that's really how I boil it down to, is just trying to size the problem, trying to take it from the perspective of different stakeholders and figuring out if it has the magnitude. And I found I'm a pretty good judge of that. So if I feel confident in it, I can go have those conversations with confidence and effectuate that change. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work sometimes. But most of the time, if you have a good reasoning for it, people will at least listen.
And I think that's where your goodwill comes into play as well,
Yeah.
right?
I'd say sometimes it's nice to go use some of these techniques to solve a problem that is within your control. I think those are not as impactful and probably not as voluminous. So I think there's some aspect of kind of gaining that trust with showing what you can do and getting the buy-in that way. I would then say once you go outside, you really have to open your mind to say, we may not just be solving for my objective. In fact, my objective may not even come first, even if you're the one that's driving this. You really need to understand their process too and understand what's suboptimal about what they do. And I guarantee there's going to be alignment there. It's not all going to be in the same direction as maybe Venn diagram-like, where you're going to have some things that really benefit both of you. But I think you really have to open up to solving something end to end and solving for more than just your objective.
There's a concept in organizational theory about question asking to basically get buy-in. And one of the questions that you are trained to ask is, what does this look like if this doesn't change? So if you've identified a problem, somebody may not see it right away. As you talk about this and say, hey, well, this is what I've seen. Is this a problem if it doesn't change? If they say no, then it's a hard place to buy in, and now you're trading on goodwill. But oftentimes I've found when I ask that question, that'll trigger something. Well, they'll go, well, because we talk about this at Connor Group, there's the all-pro free safety. So for those of you who don't know football, an all-pro free safety is somebody who cleans up everybody else's mess. And so oftentimes there's somebody in the organization, especially accounting departments are rife with these people, who are solving numerous problems that nobody knows exist because that person's working extra hours or they're turning on their laptop after they put the kids to bed. And so there isn't a problem because the problem's being hidden or solved for. So the other part of this is to talk about key man risk and to say, hey, right now you don't see this as a problem because it's being handled by Barbara. But if Barbara leaves, then what do we do, right? And that's a good way to trigger a conversation to say, because then you're fast forwarding to when there is a problem and there is a gap. Any other questions? We got one down here.
Questions for Scott, because you're in a high volume transaction-based revenue sort of a business. I was just wondering if you have any specific words of wisdom for how you tackle automation from a reconciliation perspective specifically. It's an area where depending on the business you're in, you might have no choice but to figure out a way to automate because of the substantial volume of data. There's added complexity because you have a external Visa, MasterCard acquiring bank source of truth. You may have to engage those partners to do a project like that effectively. Again, just wondering if you've tackled this at Stripe specifically and any words of wisdom to make it successful.
Yeah, so when we say this a lot internally, I don't know if I should tell people externally, but when I started, it took us 60 days to close the books, and we did it maybe 2-3 times a year. I started in February, and I was sitting in a meeting in May, And I'm embarrassed to say it took me 3 months to figure this out, but I said, did I just hear you right? We haven't closed the books yet? So we were not very good about that. And we were doing hundreds of billions of volume at the time. This is just one answer. And I wasn't super experienced in kind of building this finance system stack, from scratch. But the one thing I got a lot of conviction on early that I figured out the only way out of this mess was to close the books using Stripe-generated information. So we decide what to charge our users. We come up with a cost estimate. We bill our users. We collect money. We should be taking that information and reconciling our data with the third-party information, instead of essentially what turned out to be waiting for third parties to tell us what our results were. Now, okay, everybody should be doing that, and there's probably a lot of Stripe users in the room that struggle with the data that we give you. So there is a way in which we need to get better and work with our users to figure out the data structure you need to do your job. But I also think you need to think about the data that you have and kind of representing your financials based on your information, and then that helps you drive kind of your requirements of what you need from reporting. So what you need from your user. I was talking to Gordon and I work together quite a bit. DoorDash is a big Stripe user. They get a lot of data from us, reconciliation, and I have to tell Gordon, I have the same problem on the other side too. So I think there's opportunity to really collaborate on really having a solid foundation of what are our results based on the information you have, and then reconciling it to third-party sources. And then you're just talking about a recon problem, and there's lots of tools out there, and I'm convinced that AI is going to make that materially better in the near term.
Hi, I'm Jason Durham, and maybe this is for Aiden or Ahmed, but we talked a lot about like time to value, and Andrew showed this morning some of the statistics he's seen as far as savings and value, and I think a lot of us, myself included, I don't have a big finance transformation department or budget, right? And so a lot of what we do is kind of self-funded, skunkwork projects, POCs. You guys have touched on a lot of this, but when Aiden or Ahmed, since you're selling into companies like ours, like how do you sell the value, and how do you? Because you're right, a lot of I want to transform finance doesn't get a lot of traction necessarily. And you say, I like your question of what if we just keep doing the same thing, because I get that a lot too. Like, why do we need to change? And I think a lot of us probably struggle. I know we do to really garner the attention of the funding mechanisms that we need to really do some of these transformation projects, because it can seem just kind of like little one-off skunkwork projects. And where's the real savings? Where's the real return to time to value, et cetera? That's from a marketing perspective. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that.
I'll let Ahmed answer, but before that, I want to say I find it hilarious throughout my career that the people that actually own the budget are the last to get any budget.
Well, look, there's no magic bullet to it. Again, I think, Scott, we're talking earlier, it's, you guys are from tech firms. I'm sure 20 engineers from the product side could come in and actually automate a lot of this stuff in finance and make a big dent, but nobody pays them to do that. They do all customer-facing stuff. So, look, when we first started in process automation consulting, I very often would walk in and say, hey, listen, we don't have any budget to do anything because we just spent, $500,000, $1 million just analyzing our current state. Just getting the advice on what we should automate. We had the beautiful presentation that said, here are the 6 processes you should automate, but we just spent the money on actual analysis of that thing. We turned that around, at least from our perspective on how we do it. We go in with, hey, give us 4 of your objectives, right? This is from your CAO, CFO. What are they asking you to get done this year, right? That's it. They want your heads to be fewer heads in your department. They want productivity. They want error reduction. They want faster closing. Whatever that metric is, focus on that and tell us this is the metric that I'm trying to affect. And then I can go in and find processes and areas where I can implement with all this whole, whether it be just the dumb, RPA type of automation, whether it be intelligent AI type of automation, whether it be integration projects, whatever that may be, but I am laser focused on that one objective that you have, because that makes it easier for you to find the budget to say, hey, this is what you asked me to do. This investment gets you there. That was number one. Number two, to what Scott mentioned also, small wins, right? I will do, low-hanging fruit, especially if you're in an organization that hasn't invested a lot in automation. Low-hanging fruit abound, right? You just pick one and say, okay, I will save. We made it a point that when we took on projects, we wouldn't do anything that didn't have a sub-1-year ROI, including our fees and software, right? So we said, okay, this thing will be ROI positive just on a money basis, right? Just cash. This is how much you put in. This is how much you save. Year one, right? So that actually built a lot of confidence in the organization to say, now we should run a big program. Eventually, we'd love to have a program that continually does that, but in order to start that, automation is always front-loaded. There's no question about it. You have to invest in it to save money later, but it all depends on whether you want to boil the ocean and go for that $10 million budget for a 5-year program, or do you want to just take, okay, give me $250,000, I'll do something that's ROI positive this in the next 3 to 6 months.
And we're running out of time, so I'll keep it brief. But to add on, the yes and to that is there's a concept of first principles, which is if you can agree upon a truth that you share, you can build from there, right? So if you go to leadership and say, who do we want to be? Do you guys want costs to go up or down in accounting? I think that's usually an answer you know the answer to, right? Okay, if we want the cost to go down and we're growing, right? Draw them a graph, here's operational lift. We continue at this rate, the way we're doing things, we're going to continue to be more expensive over time. If you'd like to change that, though, we probably should get ahead of that. Now you're talking about ROI over a longer time period as opposed to trying to justify an immediate ROI. I think back to this concept of, PE cycles are 3 to 5 years, VC cycles are 2 to 6 years, depending on funding rounds. So everyone is in short-term thinking because we all have an end goal that's coming soon. Being able to articulate that past those gates is really a hard thing to do, but if you get it right, I think you get buy-in because they'll come to see the same thing you see, which is if we don't change this now, we're going to have this problem later. All right, I think we're out of time. I think we go to breakouts at this point.
Surely somebody will tell us what to do.
That's fun. Thank you guys so much for the panel. I thought that was a ton of really